Hey guys, Logan here from Popular Woodworking Magazine. So about a year ago, we started carrying a set of tools from Lumberjack Tools, and that's these guys here. These are tenon cutters for creating log type furniture. And I've had a lot of questions about types of projects that you can build with them. So I figured we'd make a video today building a fun little project. We're gonna build a dog bed platform. So I have 4 legs here, I've already cut them. And we'll have a couple of stretchers front and back, sides, and then slats to hold this. It's gonna be a really nice, cozy looking log style dog bed. But the first thing we need to do is get a hold of some material. Now I have a couple pieces here that are already peeled, but we do need to do a little bit of prep work on this material. Now the cool thing is that the type of stuff you're looking for these cutters is just straight material, about 1.5 to 3 inches in diameter, and you want to be fairly free of knots. Now we can take care of some of these, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the first thing we need to do is remove the bark. Bark is probably going to fall off anyways down the road, and if there's any insects in there, generally they're living in the bark, so it's better just to get rid of that altogether. So to remove the bark, I'm using a tool called a draw knife, and this thing is basically a large blade with a pair of handles on it. And I'm using it beveled down and just getting under the bark. And with something that is fresh and green, which is gonna be easier to work with these tools anyways, the bark likes to come off. So there's points where you can get a big section and it will just slip off. Now some species are a little bit easier to peel than others, but that bark comes off nice and clean. Clean's a relative term because it does make a mess around your workbench as you're doing this, but it leaves you with really, really nice looking material underneath. Now to hold this piece of material, I have it in this log lock, and it just has a pivoting action on this top clamp, and then the handle locks it in place so you can keep working on it. Okay, so clearly there's a lot of moisture on this green piece of wood, and I'd let this set and dry for a day or so, and all this kind of thin stuff that I keep picking at would pull off. And I would also let that surface moisture come off before I tackle any of these little branches or knots that are sticking out. So let me go ahead and set this off to the side, and I'll bring one that's been sitting for a couple days in and show you how we deal with those. So we have a couple of ways that we can tackle these. The first is just using something like this rasp. So this just has a bunch of teeth on it, and you can come in and hand tackle those and smooth those off. And this works really well for areas that you can't get a power tool into, or if you just have a few knots to take care of. This works really well. So let's look at this end here. So down here we have some of these knots that are pretty small. So for something like that, I'd use a little die grinder like this. So basically this is more or less a Dremel style or a power carver, and it has a burr bit on it. And I have a really coarse one in here because there's gonna be a little bit of moisture in this wood, and the coarse bit won't gum up as quickly as a fine one would. Now the key with this is to keep it moving. If you stay in one spot too long, it will burn, but we're gonna come back to sand this anyway, so it's not that big a deal. Now for something larger, we can bring in an angle grinder. So this angle grinder has the same style of burr disc, and this one's from Kutzall. And this is going to remove a lot more material more quickly. Now I'm using a battery powered grinder here. You could use a corded grinder. So that's a good way to smooth out any lumps and bumps that your material might have. So once you have everything all cleaned up, you have any of these little lumps ground down, now we can go ahead and bring a drill in and look at cutting tenons and mortises in our parts. So just like a normal woodworking project, for this, we want to make our mortises first, and then we'll cut our tenons, but our tenons are a fixed size here. So to drill our mortises in these round parts, we're gonna use this guy, and this is a drilling guide. And this has a couple of different things. We have a log lock down here that's gonna hold our part. And then we have this system here that is able to tilt. Now I have it set up at 90 degrees right now because we want to drill plumb holes in these legs. And this entire thing unlocks and slides down, and at that point, this is basically a drill press. I've also set a stop, so these holes are going to be approximately 1 inch deep. I have an 1.5 inch Forstner bit installed, but you can put whatever size Forstner bit in that matches the tenon cutter you are using. Now, one of the other features about this drilling guide that is really important to know is that you can change the angle. So if you're doing something like a stool or a coat rack, something like that, that you needed to drill legs at an angle, you can set that here so you can drill consistently. Now, the other thing that I've done is I've went ahead and marked the legs where the holes need to go, and I also scribed a 90-degree mark on the bottom of the legs. And that's important to remember because when we put these pieces in, we want those 90-degree marks to be vertical. That's going to make sure our holes are square to each other, so when we go ahead and install everything, we end up with a square dog bed. So the second half of this joint is going to be cutting the tenon. Now these tenon cutters you can use freehand in a drill. You just have to be careful and make sure that you're aiming nice and straight to make sure that tenon is straight on the end of your workpiece. But that's where something like this safety slide tenon cutter comes into play. As you can see, it holds the drill with the tenon cutter attached. It has these tracks that slide into this guide, and then I have a log lock that holds the workpiece in place. So this makes it pretty easy just to lock your workpiece in place, turn the drill on, and feed it in and create your tenon. So there are two things I'm going to point out real quick about the cutter. Now this is the industrial style. This has a 6-degree taper on the shoulders of the tenon. And this one is the pro style, and this has a radiused look. Now, functionality-wise, they're completely the same. They just have a little bit different look, so you'll just have to pick which one you like the looks of. And to set the length on the tenon, I've installed a tenon stop in here. And this is just a rod with a nut on each end that goes through slots at the top of the tenon cutter. And I've set this to match the tenon, or the mortise depth that we cut in the legs. However, if your tenon's a little bit long, that's fine. You'll just have a little bit of tenon showing. And in fact, you might want that if you're using bigger material. So now we can go ahead and turn the drill on, feed it into the workpiece till we contact the stop, and cut the tenons. Okay, so this dog bed is shaping up really nicely. The legs simply have a bunch of holes drilled in them. As you can see, I came back and added additional holes for a top rail on the sides and the back. The front we did not add a top rail on, so the dog can get in and out of the bed without hitting that. So now what I'm going to do is measure for some stretchers. And the thing to remember is we're working with natural material. This isn't dimensioned lumber, so there are some curves. So I'm going to measure each one independently and see what I need to cut it at, making sure I add in the tenon length. And I'll go ahead and get those cut, and I'm going to tenon them the same way, just with a little bit smaller cutter to fit in here, and then we'll glue it together. So now that we have this thing dry fit, we need to decide what orientation all the parts are sitting in. Now, because these are natural parts, they're not straight, there is curves. So some parts need to be in certain orientations versus others, but something like these rails, we can rotate around and see where we want to put them. And when I figure out where I do want those sitting, I'll go ahead and mark them with a pencil line and just give myself the best chance to make sure that I have those going back in the same orientation once I glue this up that they are in now, because the worst thing is to spread glue and then stuff doesn't fit together how you want. But at this point, we can go ahead and sand it. And generally with something like this, I'll grab just a random orbit sander, a handheld one, and what I'm looking to do is not get this super finely sanded like I would a piece of furniture. I'm mainly looking to take off any sharp edges and take off any fuzz, and that's going to help the finish absorb. Now, depending on what type of material you're using will depend on what type of glue you need to pick up. If you're using wet wood for this, or wood that is freshly cut, you definitely want to be using something like a polyurethane glue. Now, this glue requires moisture to cure. So if you're using wet wood, this is perfect. You don't have to do anything other than brush it on. But if you're using something like this, which is fairly dry, I will add a little bit of moisture on the front end. So I have a cup of water, and I'll use either a glue brush or a paper towel, and I'll dampen the tenons and the mortise. And then I'll use the glue brush to spread the glue in there and then put the joint together and apply a clamp across that joint. Now, this polyurethane glue does foam up, so you want to be fairly delicate with the glue. Try to avoid as much squeeze out as you can, but if you get any, you can scrape it off and sand it away before you apply the finish. Okay, there we go. So I got the side assembly done. Now I'm gonna go ahead and work on the other parts as well. This lower section I'm probably gonna glue together with these slats in the front and back rail, and then once the two sides have cured, I'll bring it all together. But after that's done, just a little bit of sanding and applying a finish. Now the finish that we're gonna use on this one is the Old Masters Ascend Exterior. It's an exterior grade product, but it works really well for interior stuff also. But once the finish is cured, it's time to slap the bed on it and let the pooch have a nap.